You've probably heard the Tang Dynasty called the golden age of Chinese poetry, but honestly, that doesn't quite capture it. The poets back then weren't just writing, they were engineers. They were building these incredibly intricate machines out of words. So today, let's pop the hood on one of these machines and see what makes it tick.
Okay, let's start with one of the most celebrated poems of that era, Spring Scene by the poet Du Fu. Now listening to it, it's beautiful, right? It's powerful and sad. But here's the puzzle. Does it immediately scream revolutionary genius to you? Because that's how it's seen. So what exactly are we missing here?
On the surface, yeah, it seems like a pretty straightforward, though very moving, poem about war and sorrow. The feelings are powerful, for sure, but the language itself seems pretty direct. So, how did this become one of the most revered poems in all of Chinese literature? Where is all that legendary greatness hiding?
Well, it's hiding in plain sight. You see, the poem's real power isn't just in what it says, but in how it's constructed. It's built on this hidden architecture, a kind of invisible scaffolding that's just breathtakingly complex. To really understand its genius, we have to take it apart, piece by piece.
This hidden architecture is a specific poetic form called regulated verse, which was perfected during the Tang Dynasty. And you should think of it less like writing a poem and more like competing in a poetic Olympics. It's an obstacle course. Every single word, every line has to follow this incredibly strict set of rules to even make it onto the page.
Okay, rule number 1, brutal, ruthless efficiency. The entire poem you just heard is only 40 words long. That's it. And get this, of those 40 words, 36 of them are what we call content words. They're words that paint a picture right in your mind. Mountain, river, flower, tear. There is almost zero fat, zero filler. It's just pure, concentrated imagery.
Now, did you notice a word that's completely missing from the poem? The word I. The poet never says, I feel or I see. And that's not an accident. It's a very deliberate choice. By taking himself out of the equation, he pulls you in. You're not just watching him feel sad, you're standing there, in that broken city, feeling it yourself. It's a really clever trick that turns you from an observer into a participant.
And this brings us to one of the toughest rules of all, parallelism. The two couplets right in the middle of the poem have to be almost perfect mirror images of each other. So look at lines 3 and 4. Feel lines up with hate, they're both emotions. Flower lines up with bird, both living things. It's like a perfect reflection, both grammatically and thematically. This creates this incredible sense of balance and harmony, even when the subject is chaos.
And if that wasn't enough, the whole thing has to follow a strict 4-act structure. Think of it like a mini-movie. Act 1, to begin, is the establishing shot. It sets the scene. Act 2, to elaborate, is the zoom in, where we get those detailed parallel images. Act 3, to turn, is the plot twist, where the focus shifts. And finally, Act 4, to conclude, is the final shot that brings it all home and resonates long after it's over.
So let's just recap. We have these ridiculously strict rules, word count, parallelism, a 4-act structure. You'd think every poem would end up sounding exactly the same, right? Just kind of cookie cutter. But here's the amazing part. For the true masters, these rules didn't limit them. They supercharged their creativity. So let's look at how 3 of the absolute giants of Tang poetry took this exact same rulebook and created 3 totally different universes.
Let's circle back to our guy Du Fu, the one who wrote Spring Scene. His nickname was the Poet Sage, and that tells you a lot about him. He was serious, deeply moral, the kind of poet who grappled with the big, heavy questions of life. For Du Fu, these strict rules were the perfect tool for what he wanted to do. They allowed him to connect something incredibly personal and small, like his own thinning hair, to something huge and epic, like the suffering of his entire nation at war. The structure let him bridge the gap between the self and the universe. For him, it wasn't a cage, it was more like a lens, focusing all these different scales of reality into one powerful image.
Now, let's meet a completely different character. A good friend of Du Fu's, actually, but his total opposite, Li Bai. If Du Fu was the sober poet sage, Li Bai was the wild poet immortal. He was carefree, rebellious, and had this larger-than-life, transcendent energy.
Just listen to this couplet from one of his poems. You see the difference? For Li Bai, nature isn't some sad backdrop for human problems. No way! It's alive, it's magical, it's a participant. Mountains literally have beaks and carry the moon for him. It's just a whole other level of imagination.
So think about that. He's using the exact same set of rigid rules as Du Fu. But instead of using them to connect himself to suffering on Earth, he uses them as a launch pad to rocket into the cosmos. He makes himself a god, and nature is his happy playmate. It's a fantastic contrast. Du Fu uses the rules to find meaning in suffering, while Li Bai uses them to escape it entirely.
Okay, so we have the sage and the immortal. Our third master, Wang Wei, offers a totally different path. He was also a famous painter, and his poetry is deeply shaped by a Buddhist worldview. So, naturally, they called him the Poet Buddha.
Listen to this from Wang Wei. Notice what he's focusing on? It's not about big emotions like Du Fu or wild fantasies like Li Bai. It's all about the act of seeing. It's about perception itself, how things look from one moment to the next, how what seems real can just vanish.
This is the key to Wang Wei. Du Fu explores the self, Li Bai elevates the self, but Wang Wei gets rid of the self almost completely. He uses the poem's structure like a camera, creating these painterly scenes, zooming from a huge landscape to a tiny detail. He plays with what's real and what's just an illusion. You could say Du Fu is the poet of history, Li Bai is the poet of imagination, and Wang Wei, he's the poet of pure perception, of the here and now.
So there you have it. One single, super strict poetic form, but it gives us three completely different worlds. And that brings us right to the heart of this whole thing, to an idea that feels like a total contradiction.
It's called the art of constraint. And the principle is simple. What if strict limitations aren't the enemy of creativity? What if they're actually its best friend? The idea is that when you're forced to work inside a very tight box, you have to come up with solutions that are way more clever, way more profound than if you had total freedom.
And that is the absolute key to understanding these Tang poets. For them, that demanding, rule-bound structure wasn't a prison they were trying to break out of.
No, those rules were the tools. They were the very things they used to build something that goes beyond language itself, to capture a pure feeling, a deep insight, a moment of unadulterated beauty. And that is the true genius and the enduring power of their art.